There are lots of places to be visited. When you come to visit El Minya Governorate and you decide to pass the Nile and visit El Amarna, here you're going to find some palaces. One of them is called Akhenaton Palace and the other one is called Nefertiti's Palace. The southern palace is the one that belongs to King Akhenaton. It was built of mud bricks and some architectural elements were built of stone. The palace actually was ruined, but the site is magnificent and you ought to visit it when you come to visit El Amarna. At the beginning of the reign of King Amunhotep III of Egypt, and exactly before the second year of his reign, the king married one of the greatest women in the Egyptian history. For her power in and out of the country was one of the major factors that influenced the destiny of the empire during that period. She was Queen Ti. Queen Ti was not a descendant of royal blood, but both her parents, Yuya and Tuya, occupied high positions in the country. For her father Yuya, the priest of god Min, and her mother Tuya, was a supervisor of clothes in the royal palace and a maid in the palace. Being a royal maid and a singer, chanting for god Amon, she was connected to Amunhotep III during his infancy. Thus, love and intimacy grew between her daughter and the prince, who married her eventually. That marriage was a rebel against the pharaonic traditions, which had an obligation of marriage of the king to a princess who carries the royal blood in her veins, so that her son would be guaranteed 100% to be a son of a royal queen. King Amunhotep III ignored and defied that tradition by holding a great marriage festival and commemorating that event on scarabs, which shows his strong personal will right at the beginning of his reign. The translation on these scarabs reads, "Long live King Amunhotep III, given life, and his alive great royal wife Ti. Her father's name is Yuya, and her mom is Tuya, and she's a wife of a great king whose south borders reach Karai, and his northern borders reach Naharin." The funerary furniture that were found in the tombs of Yuya and Tuya are perfect examples of the luxuriousness of the artifacts that must have been made for the king and his successor Akhenaton and his wife Nefertiti. The remainings of the palace of King Amunhotep III attached to his funerary temple, called Habo, in the west bank of Luxor, show how great it was, and decorated with natural scenes executed with the finest art of its time. Beside it, he ordered the lake to be made in a place called Zar Wecha, or the place of heaven, where he had picnics with his wife Ti in a golden boat called Tehen Aton, or the sun disk rises. The history of digging the lake was inscribed on a scarab, stating that this great lake, which length was over a mile and breadth half a mile, was dug in just 15 days. both sides of Memnon statues which represent her husband King Amunhotep III. The statue that stood once in front of a great temple dedicated to god Amun. In 27 BC, an earthquake destroyed the statues and caused fractures in their structures. The empty parts allowed air to pass through them, making a sound of whistle in the early morning. So the Greeks invented a legend about the statues, saying that Memnon, who is the son of Titus, brother of King Priam, the owner of Troy, and his wife Eos, the Greek goddess of dawn, was attacking the people of Troy with an army of Ethiopians against the Greeks. Memnon was killed by Achilles, the Greek hero, but his mother Eos picked his body from the field of war and asked Zeus to offer him eternity. The tears that fell from her eyes became the morning dew, and the sound is the sound of her mourning over her son Memnon. Even though the Roman Emperor Septimus Severus repaired the holes in the statues and the sound stopped, yet the statues kept the name of Memnon till today. In Akhetaton, King Akhenaton built a second palace in the royal suburb of this new city and called it the Southern Palace, of which few ruins remains today. A special story connects the southern suburb with Queen Ti. The story says that Queen Ti visited her son Akhenaton coming from Thebes, and it was probably a serious visit in which the former queen of Egypt was advising her son, who had all tables turned against him in Thebes by the angry priests of god Amun. The result of that historical visit was a major dispute that happened between her and her daughter-in-law Nefertiti. Queen Nefertiti left her husband's palace and went to live in the other palace, situated in the suburb of the Shadow of Ra, and took Tutankhamun with her, leaving Akhenaton and his brother Semenkhkara and his wife Merit Aton, who is Akhenaton's second daughter. Thus, the king ordered the name or cartouche of his beloved queen Nefertiti to be erased from every wall in the palace, and to inscribe Semenkhkara and Merit Aton names instead. That palace, where Nefertiti stayed in, is called the Southern Palace. The site of Amarna is Akhetaton, the new capital of King Akhenaton. It was known for the old archaeologists like Lepsius and Wilkinson and others, who dedicated their lives to the study of Egyptology. But this site was placed under spotlights only in 1887, after a great discovery in it. It was a sunny day when a peasant was searching this monumental site for manure of cattle to use it as a fuel for her oven, a method that is still used till today in the villages. The woman, while digging with her hand, found a small room that was used in the past as a storage. It was a place where the documents of the pharaoh were kept in archives. Seals over bricks told us this information. This fortunate woman found 360 tablets of clay. The tablets were written in cuneiform, and knowing they must be valuable, She transported them over the back of her donkey and sold them to her neighbor for 10 piastres, which is a tenth of an Egyptian pound. In the beginning, she thought she made a great deal, since the buyer found it hard to sell. No wonder, for nothing in their shape was enticing to buy. Artifacts dealers sent them to Dr. Oper in Paris, who replied that they are new, and sent them back to Egypt, where they were transported to Luxor to be sold. Unfortunately, most of the pieces were broken, and their value was only found then. Thus the British Museum and Berlin Museum bought most of what was left from that valuable storage. Then the Louvre Museum and St. Petersburg Museum took over part of them, in addition to what was leaked to private societies. As for the Egyptian Museum, its share was a tiny bit of what should have been all in its possession, and what was taken and displayed in the world's museums was never given back to Egypt. The discovery of Amarna texts was the most important discovery in the 19th century, not only in Egypt, but also in the old Eastern countries. After deciphering the Amarna tablets, it was discovered that they are political correspondences of the Egyptian foreign affairs during the reign of King Amunhotep III, then Amunhotep IV, or Akhenaton. The information in these letters was a light that broke out in dark past, not just in the Egyptian history, but in the history of all the civilized ancient world. It told us the truth about Babylon and Amur and the Assyrian kingdom and Mitan and Cyprus and Clikia, and also the beginning of the Jews moving in the lands. When Akhenaton moved to Amarna from Thebes, he transported the letters that happened between his father King Amunhotep III and the kings and princes, and their numbers increased during his reign. Unfortunately, the letters were not recorded with dates that hinted to the time they were written in. In each letter, the name of the sender and the receiver were written. Half of them were written during the reign of Amunhotep III, and half of which were sent by the governors who ruled under his supervision in Syria and Palestine. The most important letters concerning the people of Khita in Amarna texts are number 41 and 42. Khita, or the Hittite, was a country that contained few provinces that stretched from Minor Asia to the valleys east of Degla River and from the Black Sea to Damascus. What made them important is an important discovery in Koi Harbor in 1907 by Hugo Winkler. Records that recorded the history of Khita 2000 years BC were found in Koi Harbor, and since then they became an important source of history about the events that happened during that period. They complete the history recorded in the Egyptian sources of history, the most famous of which is the Battle of Kadesh, the battle that was recorded on the walls of all Ramses II temples. war happened during the reign of the king against the Hittites in the marshes of Lower East, which was a part of the Egyptian Empire. In that famous war, King Ramses II declared his victory over his enemies. But in Koi Harbor, the Hittites wrote that it was an even war and no one won. But what was confirmed for sure? That King Ramses II signed a peace treaty with them and held the first political marriage in history when he married a Hittite princess. During the reign of Akhenaten, the Amarna texts said that the name of the Hittite king was Shubil-Lyoma, and that they called Akhenaten King Nebchoria, which is a translation of Nefer-Kheper-Ra, who sent him a letter in the last year of the 18 years of his reign. In general, the Amarna letters provided us with a talking picture of the tight amicable relationship between the kings of the past to maintain a stable alliance and friendship amongst each other. They allow us to follow the events that happened in Egypt starting from the 18th dynasty, and the wars between Egypt and the Hittites in the 19th dynasty during the Ramesside period. King Akhenaten built his capital in the 6th year of his reign and finished constructions in it in the 8th year and lived in it 12 years. In those 12 years, he left us with some of the most important sources of history about Egypt and its art and social life and buildings, either for daily life or afterlife. The fact that puts Amarna in an unmatched position as a living place of an ancient life that once existed on its land and can be seen and touched and felt today.